Hi, everyone, and welcome to Resource Revolution, the resource management podcast. I'm your host, Christine Robinson. On this podcast, we will discuss the real-life experiences of people in and around the world of resource management. Today, we have Andrew Bone joining us. Andrew is the founder and chair of Dayshape. After working as a software engineer and chartered accountant for the early part of his career, he decided that the professional services industry needed help solving the pain of resource management and that he could apply his technical skills to build a better way. Andrew founded Dayshape with long-term friend and AI expert Alistair. Andrew, it's great having you here with us today.
Thanks, Christine. Great to be here.
Really excited to get on with this conversation. I like to start by getting a bit of background, and typically we have guests on from all different walks of life, but having something to do with resource management. Either they're a recipient of resource management or they're in the field of resource management themselves. How did you first hear of resource management? Tell us about that.
So I was on the receiving end of resource management, you could say, when I joined PricewaterhouseCoopers back in the day. So I was working in their audit firm. And even though I didn't think of it necessarily as resource management at the time, that's what was going on. My life was planned out for me on a big wall chart. And that was really my experience of it. So in terms of what drew me to working in this field, it was really that I felt the pain personally to some extent of the way it worked back in those days.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think part of it is, it's interesting because when you work in a very large, especially professional services firm, there is a general understanding of I call it operations, but at the same time, there isn't that much of the depth of understanding because you're working on technical stuff. You're obviously, you got a lot, on your plate. So it's interesting that you had that, I'd say, perspective and view of RM. My question is really around how did you then, it's interesting, right? Because when you start in one of those roles, you perhaps, or people have like a idea of what your career path might be, but you went from that to then founding an AI driven software company. Tell us about that.
Well, yeah, I suppose I'd always decided to go and do my CPA because I wanted to learn more about business, I suppose. I don't think I really knew what that meant at the time, but I had always had a dream or an ambition to try and start my own business. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I figured that getting my CPA, getting that experience under my belt would stand me in good stead for that. But it also meant that it actually gave me the insight into a business problem that then sort of opened my eyes to the opportunity to try and do something in this space. And I guess my personal experience was that, whilst there were many great things about the firm in terms of the prestige of the clients you got to work on, the interesting work, the people were brilliant. So I loved many aspects of the firm, but actually, on reflection, the resource management was probably one of the things that caused me to leave. And again, nothing against the individuals. They are doing a great job, but because of the way that the system worked or the lack of system support for resource management, it meant that effectively it was a very rigid process and it was very difficult, despite their best attempts. It was very difficult for resource managers to take account of individual preferences or any, even things as basic as trying to book a week's vacation caused them a big headache, and they had to then try and reshuffle everything around, which wasn't easy. And yeah, I didn't like that feeling of being quite constrained by the schedule in my life, even beyond work.
Yeah, no, that really makes a lot of sense, and I imagine would resonate with many people that have found themselves in similar, or having a similar experience. Mm-hmm. It's interesting then hearing you say that, because it sounds like, and this is me talking from the perspective of never having done this myself, right? But to be in a position to be a founder and actually start something new, as you said, there is that entrepreneurial, I imagine, drive and aspect. but there's also something you're passionate about, right? So I'm hearing that in how you described that. Was there a certain moment that occurred that you said, oh, that's it, now I'm going to do this? Or was it kind of a buildup over time? How was that for you?
I think it was probably turning 30,
Oh,
which,
okay.
yeah, it's maybe not what you expected me to say, but I think when it came to, as you get a little bit older, you sort of think, well, I better take the opportunities I have, and it is seen as, rightly or wrongly, it's seen as quite a risky thing to do, to go and set out on your own and start your own business. And the older you get, the more you have responsibilities, dependents, and so on. So that kind of gave me the kick to say, right, okay, I better get on and actually start doing this. And by that stage, I was very fortunate that I had that experience at PwC. I came from a technical background at university, so I had also some of the skills to go into software. And also by that stage, I was good friends with Alistair, who's the co-founder of Dayshape, and he was doing a PhD at the time in automated scheduling and optimization technology. And it was really sort of the combination of those things that led to us thinking, well, we've got both some of the knowledge to do this, but also the desire to do it, and also a bit of the market context as well.
Yeah, definitely. What did that feel like? Was it exciting, scary? What was that like?
Yeah, I loved it. It was, I suppose that it wasn't, I didn't see it as that big a risk. I actually saw the risk more being, what if I don't do it? What if I'm on my last day just before I retire thinking, what could have been? And I was very lucky that, having your CPA, having a firm like PwC on your resume, I actually wasn't that worried that if Dayshape didn't work out, I wouldn't be able to find another job. Realistically, I felt it wasn't a huge risk.
I love that. I think a lot of people it would really resonate with a lot of people what you said around not doing it, and probably for many, personal and professional perspectives, but that's an interesting one that it certainly resonates with me. Mm-hmm. Now, you talked about the solving the pain of it, and you having experienced it yourself, and likely having seen it, with other people. So tell us about that. How does Dayshape software actually improve people's working lives? Why is that core?
Yeah. So that improve people's working lives it's a bit of a mantra in Dayshape. It's our sort of company purpose. And I guess that came from my personal experience, because I know firsthand that the impact it had on my working lives, and I saw it on many other people as well. It's one of those things where when you're starting a business, you want to have a clear purpose that is more than just, we want to make money, and for me, that was a very personal one, I guess, again, because I'd felt it firsthand. But at the same time, you also, if you're trying to sell something, there has to be ROI on what you're selling. And I think the nice thing about what we do and about resource management in general is there's kind of a win-win between those two things. When you are making something more efficient, when you're actually allowing people to do resource management better, there is ROI, there's a financial benefit, but there is also like a human benefit as well. So it's a nice alignment, I think, on those things, whereas in some businesses, those two things could be in tension. But actually, nobody really wants to spend loads of time on inefficient processes or typing data into a system that already exists in another system. Like, nobody wants that. So there's nice alignment there.
Of course. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think as we continue conversations with people that are actually in the field of resource management, that I would say probably hits home for the majority of our listeners around, that's not what they want their job to be either, right? Mm-hmm. They want to get satisfaction and really a high level of job satisfaction out of the work that they do. They want it to be challenging in a positive way, and actually be able to have that influence, and have that input to the overall company's mission and strategy and what their organization is, that they're supporting.
Yeah.
As I think about that there is this. So I'm thinking about Dayshape, right? And this is coming from me as someone who with a resource management background, but really no software technology background whatsoever. So, me coming in and starting to think about Dayshape in the first place, it was really interesting, this idea of, oh, there's this AI piece.
Yeah.
Again, you hear AI all over the place. I'm getting familiar with Chat GPT and kind of downloading these different things. I'm very much not an expert. But that was really intriguing. And at the same time, it's also this big sort of question mark, because it's like, well, what does that mean? And what does the AI really do? So would love to get your perspective on that. How does AI fit into this whole thing called resource management?
Yeah. Well, it's obviously such a buzzword right now. AI is just everywhere, and it's actually a bit of a meaningless term in a way, because there's so many different technologies sitting underneath this banner of AI. You almost may as well say software, because it could be anything. The AI that helps to, drive your car is completely different from something that could write a limerick for you. So there's this broad range of technologies. As I mentioned, when we were starting Dayshape, a key part of our hypothesis for the business was coming from Alistair's background. So he was doing a PhD at the time, to get a little bit techie. His PhD was in a field of AI, a branch of AI called combinatorial optimization. And that's all about optimizing complex planning and scheduling problems. It's actually one of the areas of AI that's been around for much longer. But what we realized was it hadn't been applied really at all, or to a large extent, within the resource management space. It's the sort of technology that had applied maybe to factory management and that kind of thing. But when it came to people-based things, there was, I guess, a reluctance around using it, or a disbelief that it would necessarily work. And that's what we were really setting out to see. Well, can we make it work? Is there a sort of happy medium between, like, a partnership between the technology and the resource managers, which can help everybody?
Yeah. Can you say that again? What was that again?
Combinatorial optimization is the
very cool. You learn something new every day. So that's really interesting. And then when you take that and you think about, so I come from a Big Four background. So do you, right? Mm-hmm. So do probably many of our listeners, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's this idea of barriers, misconceptions, trust. Do you see anything like that, especially in this industry?
Yeah, we've seen it a lot over the years. I like to joke about everybody saying they're special. So I'll try and explain what I mean by that. When we were first setting out, and I'm just not even trying to win business, just literally having conversations with people to try and research this world. Everybody always said, yeah, well, it wouldn't work for us because we're special in some way, but it would be great for those guys over there, and they would then point us towards a different team or a different department, different business line. And that was kind of interesting, I thought. And we were very fortunate that eventually we came across a group of people, and it was actually in a delivery center environment for one of the Big Four, where we didn't even realize this at the time, but actually, to their credit, they were probably 8 years ahead of the rest of the world in terms of their willingness to adopt AI and how enthusiastic they were for the technology. So we found these really early adopter people who were keen to be on this sort of bleeding edge of this, and they really helped us build out Dayshape. Because we built it with them, they automatically had a high degree of trust in it. It was their baby just as much as ours almost. So it was very, very successful there in that environment. But to come back to your question, what we then found when we started to roll it out elsewhere was we hit across that trust issue, because people that, the next customer who was trying to use it hadn't been involved in the genesis of it, and therefore didn't have that degree of trust in it. And it was a big realization for us, and one that we're even still working on to this day. But what it made us realize was that the technology, the raw capability of the technology, was only as useful as the user experience around it. So although the technology could be brilliant, if the user experience didn't, for example, explain why the system was doing what it was doing in order to give you, the user, the level of trust, then people wouldn't use it. It could be literally doing the exact same thing, but in one case it's sort of showing you why and its rationale, and in the other case it's not. And if it's not explaining that, then people will come up with their own reasons as to why they don't agree it should have been done that way or whatever. And trust with technology is just the same as trust in general. It takes a long time to build it up, but it's very quick to lose it. And so that's something that we've put a lot of effort into in Dayshape, is to really have that explanation. And in a way, I like to think of it as almost like a conversation between a resource manager and the system, where Dayshape can say, well, here's my suggestions for what we could do here. The RM can take the things they like, can knock back the things they don't like, and then they can go back and forth until they come up with a plan together that's as optimized as it can be.
That's really interesting what you just said around having that, as you call it, a conversation, right, between the resource manager and the technology that they're using. Because a lot of resource management, in particular, when you're working with these, I'll call it gray areas, a lot of resource management, and people will say this, it's more of an art than a science. There isn't one perfect answer. You'll have maybe on the audit side where it's this like puzzle piece that you're trying to put together and the hours don't quite work, and you've got someone that has the right maybe industry background, but not the right availability, and you're trying to work that out, or you're on the consulting side and you've got someone who has done similar work at a similar client, but not this particular piece of expertise, right? And so actually it's interesting because I back in the day, when everyone was sitting, kind of in person, I'm picturing we had this resource management sort of, it was like this U-shaped section of the floor. And it was very much a conversation. It was this idea of having a sparring partner to kind of say, well, hey, this is what I'm thinking. And the person would say, well, did you think about doing it this way? And, kind of make these suggestions. So it's actually really interesting to think about that in terms of really upskilling the resource manager and the resource management process and enhancing that. Because imagine if you had this sort of intelligent, tool that was able to provide that. Now, does that mean that it takes the place of having a conversation with someone else? No, of course not, but it certainly adds to it, I would think.
Yeah. And I think that's what we recognize very much what you were saying at the start there, that there is no perfect answer and there's always trade-offs to be made. So that's why it's different and it's interesting and it's fun to work on this compared to some other optimization type of problems where there could be literally a perfect answer. But when you're dealing with people things, there's, as you say, there's always shades of gray there. So that's why we see it as being, an assistance, something that helps either if you're dealing with very large volumes of work, where maybe like in 80% of the cases, just getting an answer and it's a pretty good one is a great result. And then the RM can focus their time on the 20% that might need more special care. So there's a good use case around it there. Or also just in cases where there's lots of different potential ways you could try and solve this, or lots of different potential options for people who could staff this work. And you're really looking at like the pros and cons between them across, whatever those dimensions might be, whether someone who's in the right location, but is going to cost more or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I like that because I can think of almost no situation from a resource management perspective where that wouldn't be helpful, because it's very rare that you have the exact perfect fit for something that comes your way. And if you do, that's one of maybe 25 other resource requests that you're working on at one time, right? So I think that makes a lot of sense, but it's interesting because I can't help but realize there is a lesson here in what you're describing related to the trust aspect. So when you're describing it, obviously from the perspective of Dayshape's journey in growing, right, and kind of being adapted in different maybe industries or firms, it's really interesting because that's actually exactly what happens from the perspective of a resource management process, right? Because if you're a resource manager or a resource management leader, regardless of the stage of, I would say, maturity within an organization, but especially at the early stages, you're dealing with that same thing, right? Where you've got this process that you know is going to be beneficial. You believe in it. You know for a fact that it is going to help the organization, but you're dealing with people that might not necessarily understand that or agree or maybe aren't open to that because they had these other ideas in their head about maybe past experiences or something that didn't go right or not quite grasping, what this means. And so It's interesting what you said around having that collaborative kind of co-designing piece. Yeah. I know in my own experience leading resource management and actually implementing resource management processes in different places, that is so important, right? So I think even if you're not, starting a software company, but you're in the resource management space, this is something that you should think about because that element of kind of co-designing it, I think, would you agree with that?
Yeah. And it is an interesting parallel, I think, between the software like Dayshape and what we do, but actually, as you say, the resource manager themselves, because there's often a tension. And I think this is sometimes where people can lose trust, either in the RM or within Dayshape. There's always a tension between what is best for an individual resource request versus what might be best for the firm as a whole. And that's one of the challenges it's interesting and it's inherent in resource management. And if you are working through a planning process, one request at a time, trying to find the best person, you are not necessarily going to be able to see the best thing for the overall firm. Or likewise, if a partner is coming and saying, well, why have you given me this person? I know this other person would be better. They're not necessarily going to see that actually there was a better opportunity for that second person to work on that made more sense in the big picture. So a big part of what we try and do within Dayshape is, I guess, visualize and surface the big picture so that at least you can tell, okay, I can see that wasn't the perfect match for this particular request, but I can also see that overall we're doing well here on the overall planning. Because ultimately that's really a big part of Dayshape's value proposition is about trying to make firms as a whole run more efficiently. And in a way, what that can mean sometimes is breaking down fiefdoms or like trying to challenge that sort of behavior of people having favorites and so on, because those are patterns that don't necessarily lead to the best performance for the firm overall.
Agreed. There are so many of those. And it's actually, so one of the things that you talked about kind of at the start of our conversation is this idea of even at the personal level, it's the idea of improving people's working lives, right? And so I can't help but notice, again, another parallel, right? Because I have been in so many situations where as a resource manager who's, maybe supporting a particular population, or as an RM leader who has multiple resource managers that are kind of on the front lines, so to speak, in terms of, dealing with these open needs and all kinds of requests and demands, I would even say in some case, it's so easy to allow yourself to get bogged down in the maybe negativity of a perceived, let's say, failure of and there's a staffing need that comes up and you can't meet it exactly, right? You can meet it, as you say, 80%, but not 100%. And now a word about our sponsors, Dayshape. Do you ever feel like your team spends more time managing spreadsheets than getting actual work done? If you're a strategic leader in a professional services firm, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Say goodbye to the chaos with Dayshape. Dayshape is an AI-powered platform that takes the stress out of resource management. Imagine scheduling, planning, and staffing all being handled in one smart system that actually understands your business. Sounds too good to be true? Believe me, I dreamt of having this type of technology when I was a resource management leader. It's like having a superpower for your firm, boosting productivity, profitability, and even employee happiness. Plus, it seamlessly integrates with your existing tools, so there's zero disruption. Do you want to see the magic in action? Check out Dayshape.com and see how your resource management function can be elevated to a more strategic position. Trust me, your team and your CEO will thank you. I remember there's someone, she was leading RM for a particular part of the firm, and she was really upset, because the partner, the leader in this practice was not happy because there were a number of open needs that were, continued to remain open. They were still working on them. And, she was kind of getting upset about that and feeling like, well, what does this mean? Am I not on top of this? But then when we looked at that, where they were compared to where they were last year, they were actually 2,000 hours in terms of filled needs. They were 2,000 hours ahead of where they were last year, right? So wow. Again, this idea of the bigger picture, I actually think clearly from an organization perspective, we don't need to talk about why that makes sense, right? But I even think, again, there's this sort of, I don't know if I call it a misconception or maybe even just a fear that, hey, this technology is going to take my job or do something with my job. And actually what you're saying is, well, no, here's yet another example of why it wouldn't, right? It would be able to kind of put that into perspective, really.
So yeah, there's something I know that you've talked about before on the podcast around elevating resource managers. And I guess that is what I think of when you say that. There's an opportunity in my view to try and redefine what some people's view of resource management is. I know I'm preaching to the converted here, but I think that if you're running a professional services firm where your people are your main source of revenue and your main cost, then how you use your people, how you're deploying your people is one of the most important things in terms of the operations, the internal operations of the firm. And I sometimes think, like, if resource management was called resourcing operations, would people have a different view of it because it's about more than just scheduling? Resource management historically, like really going back maybe 20 years, was almost in some firms at least seen as sort of one step from the PA of the partner. In many cases might be actually done by the PA of the partner. So it was kind of seen as a bit more of an admin role. But I think there is an opportunity in the next 5 or 10 years to try and make it be seen as a key, the tuning the engine of the firm basically, by doing resource management really well. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't change and disruption in some ways, and that can be scary for people. But for people who want to move in that direction with their career, then I think the technology can help them get there.
I could not agree more, but let's talk about that. So there's this idea of what this could be. Mm-hmm. We know that. Then there is this idea of the blockers, the barriers. So let's talk about that. What are the misconceptions, the myths that exist, whether it's about technology, about resource management, Mythbusters? How do we deal with those?
we see this across our customer base because there's a really broad range of maturity levels within our customer base. So at one end of the scale, we do have customers who just, resource management within their firm doesn't yet have what we would think the sort of profile we'd think it would deserve, and it's seen as more of a scheduling function, and that's pretty much it. At the other end of the scale, we have customers who are really leveraging all the data that's in Dayshape, which is really pretty much the crucial information you need to know how the firm is doing at any given time, and also predict how it's going to do next quarter or next year. That, like, the firms that are really at the high end of maturity, what they're being able to do with the data they're getting out of Dayshape is really great, and it's really sort of helping to put resource management on the map, because it's ultimately, a lot of the time, it's really turning the role of resource management into a dollar impact and showing that, and that often is what gets it on the map, if you like. So yeah, I'd say in terms of misconceptions or mythbusters, I think the first one is really around that resource management needs to just be about scheduling. I think what we're trying to do with Dayshape in general is move, that is a core part of the job, but can we make that part easier so that resource managers can kind of level up and have more time to deal with the more strategic things about, should we even be working on that client? Should we be, what should we be hiring for? What skills gaps do we have? How could we collaborate better across regions, across states, or between service lines? All these kinds of things are where I think RMs can then help to add a lot more value and then be seen to add a lot more value as well.
And it goes back to what you said earlier around this idea of elevating the resource manager, elevating resource management, right? And that's this whole concept of there's the career of resource management, the profession, but then there's also the process, which I'd argue is happening no matter where you are, whether or not you have resource managers or not, right? So
100%, yeah.
There's that whole piece of it. How does that overlay with this idea of innovation, right? Because presumably, right, a company like Dayshape, they've put out this product and you're continuing to improve it. And the resource management community, and as you've even described, there's a great level of disparity in terms of maturity. How does that work? Does that get crazy, or is there a way to plug into that?
Yeah, I think resource management is always evolving in a way. So I couldn't agree more with what you said, that whether or not a firm has resource managers, they have somebody doing resource management. And one of the things I find a bit weird about resource management is it often doesn't have a straightforward home. So sometimes it might sit under HR, sometimes it might sit under a COO, sometimes it might not exist at all and it's being done by project managers. But what I think that means is sometimes you have different senior stakeholders in a firm sort of run initiatives almost off their own bat because they see a problem that are really sort of trying to solve a resource management problem, but they wouldn't necessarily think of it in those terms. So that can then lead to a lot of random, whether it's different tools being used across all different parts of the firm or very fragmented and not integrated sort of setup within the firm with lots of different systems. And it all is coming from a very well-meaning place, but because there isn't a lack, because there is sort of a lack of clear ownership, sometimes then it can lead to that. So I guess it's not a very technology-based answer, but actually I think innovation for a lot of firms would really be properly establishing resource management, giving it proper executive sponsorship and getting the processes up and running. And the technology plays obviously a big part in supporting that, but it's not enough by itself. And we have, like I say, we've got a range of maturity of customers and we're adding innovative things to the product all the time. But it's really only the more mature customers who've got all the other groundwork in place who tend to take advantage of those technological innovations. The customers that are further down the maturity curve are really just trying to work on the basics and they really need to get those things sorted before they can benefit from more technology innovation.
I think that's so important. And I'm going to play that back because the way that I have seen that play out, and to be clear, I think is unfortunate that I have seen this play out across the, let's call it resource management profession, is it's this vicious cycle of not having this, I'll call it elevated, more strategic focus on resource management, which then makes it very difficult to deliver elevated strategic resource management. And then it makes it much harder to get the investment in something like a tool that could really level things up. Part of what I actually think is at the crux of this problem, it's not the problem, but it's a part of the problem, is that even those individuals who understand and really know what the resource management process should be, because to your point, there's others that are trying to achieve something like it, but then there's others that really know. They've seen it work in other places. They come in and they have the background. what is sometimes missing is then the idea that you not only have to run the process and maintain the process, but at times you also have to sell the process and you have to convince people of that.
Yeah.
And so I go back to what we talked about in the beginning, this entrepreneurial mindset. What advice would you have for someone in that place where they're either maybe a newly established resource management leader, or there's someone, maybe they're a partner in a firm saying, hey, we should do this. What from an entrepreneurial perspective do you have to share there?
Yeah. So I would say two things. I'd say make it about the end result, and in most cases, that's what does this mean for revenue? But it's not necessarily just about that. It could be about attrition or other things, but hard stats that you think like this is the needle we're trying to move by putting in place resource management. And also, and I hate to say it, I sometimes think there is this almost like a brand image problem around resource management because it's a term that's been around for a long time and people have a preconceived idea of what it is. I remember not that long ago speaking to a partner at a sort of somewhere in the top 10, mid top 10 size firm. And he said, yeah, we don't have any problem with resource management. Our problem is we've got a really big utilization problem. And that just made me sort of laugh inside because it's like, that is resource management. And it just brought it to life for me about how the meaning of the term isn't always, or people's understanding of the term isn't always that helpful. So I actually hate to say it, but one of my pieces of advice would be don't talk too much about resource management. Talk about the end results.
Yeah. Well, and I guess bringing it back to the technology, the tech can help with that, right? Because you talked about quantifying things. I imagine, I'm not an expert, right? But I imagine there's all kinds of reports and.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, if you can pull up a report easily, as you can do in Dayshape, obviously, little plug, but you can show that in front of a partner and say, this is what our project is predicted to write off. We are currently, based on what we've already put through our timesheets and based on what we've got planned out in our resourcing plan, we are going to go over, and that is real lost revenue that you can do something about if you know about it. I'm sure we've all been in the case, whether you're using a lawyer or whatever else, when at the end of the project they say, oh, we actually spent a bit longer on this, we need to charge you a little bit more, but don't worry, we'll split the difference or whatever. It's not a nice conversation to have for either party. It's so much better to have that conversation up front. If you know and you can see it happening, maybe you can change the scope of the engagement project to come back in under budget. So that's real hard dollars. That's a way to really show the value of what resource management can bring.
Agreed. And on that note, we're talking about innovation. We're talking about the profession and the maturity kind of evolving, hopefully in a positive direction over time. What excites you about all this? What excites you about the future of AI and resource management?
The thing that immediately springs to mind is just how far there is still to go. So I think there is a huge amount of potential, both in what Dayshape does, but also I think, what Dayshape or tools like it can do in future. You touched on, ChatGPT earlier and things like that. That's something we've got very much in our sights as part of our vision for where resource management can go, to allow people to interact more directly with a resource management tool in a more natural way. So I think there's a lot of scope for the technology to still advance tremendously. But actually, I think the technology is already quite far ahead of where the typical maturity level is. So there's even further to go within the industry about trying to up the maturity, up the profile of resource management, all the things we've just been talking about. I've seen it happen at a handful of firms that are really, really leading the pack, but I don't see it happen industry-wide yet in professional services. So I think there's still a lot of scope to make it a lot better. And that I guess that's what excites me about it.
That is exciting. And And it's interesting, right? It's not just exciting, it's kind of inspiring. And I think, again, going back to that entrepreneurial mindset, there are people that will hear that and find that really exciting and be inspired to go do something. What advice do you have for them? Aspiring innovators in this industry?
Oh, I don't know. Give it a go is definitely the thing I would say. I mean, a lot of people have ideas and don't act on them, I feel. And that was certainly, as I said, I didn't want to be one of those people. So it depends on the scenario. I guess if you're in a resource management role, it probably, you'll know better than I do, but I feel it's probably about finding an exec sponsor who really buys into what you're trying to do, and then using that relationship to help sort of together try and, as you say, it's essentially, it's a selling job. It's about trying to sell through the actual value of what you can bring, so that you can start building something. But yeah, there's a lot of, I guess, because of that low level of maturity, because of the technology innovation, there's a lot of opportunities in my view. So, anyone that has that more entrepreneurial or kind of problem solving mindset, I do think it's an exciting space to be in for that reason.
Very exciting. Well, I'm inspired. I think that's really cool. I can't think of a better way to kind of end, on a positive note, but I can't let you go yet because we haven't played our game. So here's how this is going to work. Welcome to the Would You Rather segment of Resource Revolution. I'm going to ask you 3 questions. So for everyone's background, Andrew has not seen these questions. We are going to just get his genuine answer. And I'm going to start with the first one. Okay. Would you rather manage an overflowing Excel spreadsheet for a customer's resource management process, or schedule a year's worth of your own meetings using only sticky notes?
Oh, I've been known to be a bit of an Excel geek, so I'll go for the former.
Okay.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
I like it. Okay. Question number 2. Would you rather have unlimited budget for developing resource management tech tools, but no team to help, or an amazing team with a shoestring budget for development?
Ooh, that's a tricky one, because I think, when I think back to the early days of Dayshape, I would say we were the latter. We didn't have big VC backing or anything in the early days of the company, and I still think we managed to do a lot with a brilliant team on a small budget. So yeah, I think I'll have to go for the latter.
There you go. Yeah, no, it's an interesting one for sure. Okay, last question. Would you rather oversee the most complex product release of your career with all board members watching in real time, or relive your most strenuous busy season as an accountant?
Definitely the first one. I'm very fortunate that at Dayshape we've got a very supportive and knowledgeable board. They've got a lot of experience in the industry, and our releases generally go relatively smoothly. So yeah, I'd much rather do that than do another busy season.
Well, yeah, I don't blame you. I think that's probably what I would have picked myself. So Andrew, it's been awesome talking with you. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And with that, we'll wrap up our conversation. Thank you all for tuning in, and be sure to subscribe to hear more episodes.